So I have to thank for this presentation that just happened because it was a wonderful segue into my presentation. Just a little background for those of you in the audience that don't know much about the CML Society of Canada. We're very privileged to have a very good board that guides us and advises us. So we have Sandra Shaw, who is a biomedical ethicist, and then we have Dr. Susan McNamara, who is a CML researcher in resistance and leukemias and also a CML patient. And we have Stuart Sklar, a lawyer, and we have the access to local CML leaders and international CML advisors. So when we looked at the situation with generics, we had access to a good reach of how do we get a perspective on this. So I think I go like this. All right. So as you heard yesterday, there's a crunch on in Canada. We're trying to get all the provinces to provide equitable health care to us, CML patients, with oral cancer drugs. So we've been after our government for the past 2 years with lots of conversations going across the country, getting them to fund all of these for us. And so when the generics started to come around, you can be sure the governments then were calling us back to the table because they said, okay, you wanted something, we wanted something. So our health care dollars are being tightly scrutinized. We need to reduce our budgets and spendings. The private insurers need to reduce their spending. And to add to our conundrum in Canada, generic prices in Canada are capped to 18 to 26% of the branded drug prices, so that will equate to a lot of savings. So what is a poor CML patient going to do? Well, first of all, we have to remember that it isn't just about the money. We need to remember that there are ethical considerations in healthcare. So we looked first at what are those things, and we reviewed our various patient rights. So we have a right to autonomy. We have the right to information that is related to our disease, treatment options, and understanding milestones of our treatments. We also have the assurance that patient interests must come first, and we have right to individualized treatment, and we can even refuse treatment if we want to. And we need to consider cost implications, but we can never make it an impetus to do something. So we have heard that the argument is generics, and particularly the imatinib that we were getting in Canada, was a very high quality. So we really don't have a strong argument to just go to the government and say, we just won't take it. So we had to accept the inevitability of generics, but we had to embrace the opportunity to engage all stakeholders and do research and see where we can have some negotiation. But the first thing we needed to do is we needed to know the differences. So it was very well eloquently explained prior to this presentation. But the Novartis Gleevec in Canada is the beta crystal formulation, and it has a particular excipient. And an excipient is a bulking agent that helps the active pharmaceutical ingredient get absorbed into the body. And the Teva drug and the Apotex drugs are alpha crystallization, and each of them have different excipients. So there's some reasons for us to look at concern. How do we look at real bioequivalence? So we've already know now what bioequivalence means, and in Canada, it's the fact that if two drugs are bioequivalent, there is no clinically significant difference in their bioavailability in the body. And we also found out in our research that Canada bioequivalence standards are among one of the highest in the world. And I'm not going to cover the next point because we already did, but when we look at these bioequivalences, we're obviously comparing brand to generic. And I think the best thing for us to realize here is that the bioequivalent studies for Canada were done at McGill for both the Teva and Apotex products. And what that means to us is that's a well-recognized, internationally recognized institute and lab. So, but we found something else out in our research, and we found that there was a special classification in Canada, and it's called critical dose drug. And we wanted to explore that a little bit. in the context of all of the recent data that we are coming across with regards to particularly David Marin's study on adherence. So what is this critical dose drug classification? So we found out that it's a classification reserved for drugs that may be very toxic or may have a more narrow therapeutic range. And looking at the David Marin study, and we can certainly see that if you miss just 3 doses of Gleevec in a month, you can significantly potentially reduce your ability to achieve an optimal response. So also, we know that with critical dose drugs, they have confidence interval ratios that are tighter. And interestingly, these drugs may be susceptible to comparative small clinical trials in real patients in a fasted and fed state. So we found this very appealing for us to talk to government and see what we could do with regards to imatinib. But now we had a third step, because now that we had all this knowledge that we researched, we needed to go and try to engage all the stakeholders. And we wanted to do it in such a way where we could present a really good story to everyone to show that we really had done our homework. So we had to first identify who are those stakeholders, and in Canada, that's provincial health ministers and drug executives. It's one country, 10 provinces, and each province likes to behave like their own country. So what we did is we had face-to-face meetings with them where we provided information highlighting treatment goals and objectives according to the new ELN and NCCN recommendations. And we also talked to them about the importance of achieving optimal responses to drug. We also talked to them about the critical dose drug argument in the context of the adherency trials with David Marin. And we also had an opportunity to talk about treatment-free remission. So we could go back to the government and say, if you want to look at us to help you control your healthcare dollars so that you will fund all of our drugs for us like we're asking, then we also should tell you that we need to be really careful about how we do this, because we cannot lose the gains that we've made, because we cannot risk patients no longer being eligible for potential stopping trials in the future, which could also save money. So then we had to go to the patients, and we have to educate the patient, and we have to say, patients, it's really about us becoming responsible healthcare consumers. In several provinces who have adopted just recently the generics, actually, it's not even the clinician's choice. When the patient goes to the pharmacist to renew their prescription, they are just switched over to a generic. And in Ontario, for example, they said the pharmacist may tell the patient they made the switch, but the onus is on whether the pharmacist remembers to do that or not. So we don't mind going along with this, but we also need to know that we can minimize our exposure to risk. So how do we do that? Well, we make sure that we bring up the topic now of PCR. It is now really critically important for patients to get on that page, know their PCR number. We breathe new life into the what is my PCR. We use our PCR tracker app, and we engage our doctor, and we say, what is our PCR number? And right now we have a checkpoint, because something is going to switch. We now can look and say, are we really happy with the response we have right now? Because maybe the switch is not going to be to a generic imatinib. Maybe it's going to be, I need to get a deeper, better response, so I may have to go to another drug. Could be dasatinib or nilotinib or bosutinib. So we have to know now then what generic drug, if we do go the route of generic drug, and I have to tell you that in Canada, it may be a choice for some patients, their own choice, to go on generic only because of insurance problems. You have to know whether you're being switched to the Apotex or the Teva, because you now have to consistently receive the same generic from the same company. So what we say to patients is, when you get your new prescription, take a picture if you have to, but help yourself remember what drug you're being given. and record your start date. And then track your quality of life. We have quality of life forms on our website. Go through them, sit down with your doctor. And as with any drug, if you notice any serious problems, you need to report that to your hem-onc. And you need to tell your doctor, in the cases of Ontario, that you've been switched, because your doctor may not even know that you were switched. And then we are asking people to be willing to share their experience. We've set up a survey on our website. And one other thing is, ideally, we like in Canada that if you do get switched to a generic Gleevec, our big hope is that you will be monitored for quite a few months, once a month PCR, which is exactly what we do with regards to when any drug or dosing is switched on a patient. So an autonomous and engaged patient, we have to realize that our CML journey is unique to ourselves. What works for us may not work for other patients. And our experience with drugs, including generics, may be very different from one patient to the other. So no one can tell you, hey, if you go on that generic, you're going to have a horrible time, because we don't know. There's no data. We're the data. But here's something comforting, and that's why we like this once monthly monitoring that we're trying to get them to do, is that when we look at the Mahone data from all the stopping trials, and when those patients are tracked very closely, if they start to lose, if their CML starts to come back, when their drug is restarted, all of those patients actually regain their optimal response, and we want to make sure that that happens with Canadian CML patients. Remember that we are the data. So what's happened is in Canada, there is really no CML registry tracking except for in the province of Quebec. In Quebec, the province has decided to not just arbitrarily replace branded Gleevec with generic Gleevec, but there is generic Gleevec available. So the key opinion leaders in Quebec are actually tracking the experience with the patients who are being switched. However, there's not a lot of data. There's only been about 4 months of tracking. So we're looking forward to seeing how that data tracks out. And what are we doing ongoing? Well, we're continuing in our dialogues and discussion with Health Canada, and it's directly Health Canada that we need to have the discussions with regards to the critical dose drug classification. We will certainly report survey findings to the public if we get enough data on it. Right now it's a very slow accrual. We are going to continue to monitor, though, through the Health Canada website, all the adverse events that are being reported for generic imatinib. And we're going to continue to raise awareness of treatment-free remission as a new goal of treatment for CML. And we've actually undertaken a partnership with Novartis in Canada to do pan-Canadian workshops to actually put everything on the table to talk about getting patients educated about PCR and treatment-free remission. So we're trying to lead by being an example of an autonomous, informed, engaged patient. And that's it.
Okay, questions, Milena?
Cheryl Anne, thank you very much. I would like to raise one question which relates to previous lecture and to your lecture. So, I'm interested in opinion about switching between 2 or even more generic drugs. At first lecture of the doctor, I would assume that it doesn't matter. But at your lecture, I think that your opinion looks like that it is not desirable to switch between different generics. Is that matter of side effects, or what would be?
Well, it's to capture the real data. So if you're switching, we're not implying that there's a big difference between the two of them. But if we're really trying to make a case for anything, we have to make sure that the patient is taking the same drug. So it's very possible. There are some people who cannot take an Apotex generic, and there are some people who can. And that means any apothec made generic. It just happens that way. So if you don't do well on an apothec's generic imatinib, you may find that you do well with the Teva because the excipient is different in both of those drugs. So to track data, you need to minimize the variables. So we want to make sure that you're always on the same drug. And that's a problem because generic companies will go in and do price wars into your pharmacist. So we actually had to go to the provinces and say, you need to control this. You need to assure us that patients aren't going to be on Teva 1 month, Apotex the next. So I can tell you that a couple of provinces that we communicated with actually only allowed one generic in, so that that would not be the case.
Okay, Yeton?
That help?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there any data about side effects, and is there any difference between original and generic in regards to side effects?
In Canada, no. There really isn't solid clinical data. We're just beginning. There's anecdotal information, but there is no, I mean, as patients we're talking, and I'm hearing that there are some patients who have switched to a generic have had more nausea, more diarrhea. But then I've heard from other patients who switched to a generic and they actually find that they tolerate it better. Those are all anecdotal for now. We really don't have data.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one question there.
Cheryl Anne, I have one question. Just a matter of interest. The Texa and the Apotex, where is it manufactured, you know, the drug? Is it manufactured in Canada? Or is it imported from some pharmaceutical company from India?
So, okay, I guess you can say the API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient, is sourced from India, the powder. It's manufactured in Canada, both the Apotex and the Teva.
Okay, thank you. More.
Oh, wait, Gilbert.
Sorry to be the one asking the tough questions, but I can't avoid it. I say. You said you have a partnership with Novartis about generic education of the patients. Isn't there a conflict of interest involved?
Yeah, a partnership with Novartis to do workshops on talking about, actually the CML Society of Canada put together the entire content of the workshop, but we're getting unrestricted grant from Novartis Canada to put the workshops together or else we couldn't do it, we wouldn't have funding. So, but the content is all from the CML Society of Canada. So is it conflict? No, because it's unrestricted. So if we're talking about all the drugs, we negotiated with Novartis. We said we're going to have to give a few minutes to generic drugs because they are a reality in our market.
Okay, we'll have two more questions, one there and Jadranka after that.
Very short question. Can you tell us what is the percentage of the CML patient in Canada who takes actually generic drugs? Thank you.
Who currently takes generic drugs? Really small right now, because although it was approved last April, it took the provinces time to put it on their provincial formulary. So I can tell you, and Novartis Canada is here and they can probably collaborate this with me, but we were under the impression that about 50% of the Canadian CML population were being treated on Gleevec, branded Gleevec. So how many have actually switched over to generic? Really hard to say right now. I think maybe I'm going to take a wild guess, about 5 to 10% of that.
Okay, Jadranka, please.
I'm Jadranka Santini from Croatia, and I have just now heard something that is a common knowledge, that you shouldn't switch from one generic to another in order to track your illness properly. We in Croatia have from recently the problem that there are 7 generic imatinibs on a list, and since the financial situation is not very good, the hospitals are going to buy for their patients the generic that has the lowest price each month or each 2 months, or I don't know exactly the periods of time. And this is the big problem and the challenge for our society, to try to avoid this change of various types of generics.
And this is exactly why we say to our patients, you need to be engaged, take a picture of your drug, and argue and discuss with your pharmacist about the need for you to stay on a consistent generic, because you can't keep changing the variables around like that. So that is the work of the patient advocacy.